Yeah, there it goes. Good evening, YouTube folk. And now we're going to put up Facebook. Let me get a camera facing this way. Alrighty. Good evening. Richard Slezak here. We're doing live web radio. A University of the Air style radio. Okay. Alrighty, we have the Facebook up here, billboard, and so we have to change a few things up there, and we're going to proceed doing that. Printing up name. Sunday Islam show, and let us yeah, I think I'll go with just listing me and host Richard Slezak. Richard Slezak. Yeah, we have the further bill down below that explains that, so I'll just leave it at that. And here we go with the start broadcast on Facebook. And all right. So, continuing to march, we're going to wind into the show. And over to here we go. Getting the... Okay, we have, looks to be 6:24 p.m. And we have done YouTube, Facebook, and I'd like to, one of my favorite newspapers is the Chronicle, and they have an excellent weather page. Now, what their weather page shows down here is the jet stream. And we have, right now we don't, it's not, well, anyways, it comes in through Humboldt County, Mendocino County, and then comes up across north through Modoc County, the northwest corner of Nevada, and then across Idaho diagonally, southwest to northeast. The western 9/10 of Montana, all the way over in the west corner, traveling northeast, where then it does a big bow up through Alberta and Saskatchewan and into Ontario, south of Hudson Bay. That would be nicer if it just went straight across the United States, through Lake Superior, Yeah, you get enough of this up and down stuff. This isn't bad, though, compared to what it's been over the past few months. It is June. That is a good, okay. It comes out of Canada, around Montreal, and then across New York and out through Connecticut and Long Island. So not a bad jet stream pattern. Reservoirs, this week is Hetch Hetchy is 99% of is at 99% of capacity. Last year at this time it was at 85% of capacity, and normal is 79% of capacity. What the heck? Pardon me for not having checked the sound. It is 6:28, and we just went for some minutes at low volume to 6:28 at low volume. Mics not on. Good thing I wasn't trying to record the show at this portion. And again, this is the jet stream is currently traveling through Northern California, Northwest Nevada, Central Idaho, far west Montana, across Saskatchewan, Alberta, into Ontario, bowing southeastward at that point, south of Hudson Bay, but north of Lake Superior, traveling about 200 to 300 miles north diagonally across Ontario and Quebec, into New York, and across New York, Connecticut, and out across Long Island. So good position for the jet stream at this time, traveling across the United States. Hetch Hetchy is at 99% of capacity. We're doing a reservoir report, and we're using Friday 6968 Chronicle, and page C6, and last year it was at 85% of capacity. Normal is 79% of capacity. East Bay Municipal Utilities District reservoirs are currently at 94% of capacity. Last year at this time they were at 83% of capacity. There is no rating of normal for their system. The Marin Municipal Santa Clara Valley Bureau not reporting. Bureau of Reclamation is which looks to be at 82% of capacity. Last year at this time was at 88% of capacity, and normal is at 80% of capacity. In headlines in the Chronicle, there were millions of dollars in wages not paid in the restaurant industry in the Bay Area. 7 in particular were cited. Not a bad thing. U.S.-Canada ties strained ahead of Trump's visit. And we're looking at Friday's Chronicle. Trump and allies are at odds ahead of the G7 summit. There's a mystery over sonic attacks being done by the Chinese. Nicaragua, protesters in open rebellion against their president. And also in Central America, Guatemala, poor weather, danger, halt search and recovery efforts from the victims of the volcano. Continuing with Friday's Chronicle, a Sunday evening news, if you will. In the Congo, a woman opens her home to orphans of war. In the Gaza Strip, with U.S. aid frozen, that is aid, there's more poverty. And there's an opioid crisis going on, ad campaign aimed at a youth prevention. Don't do it, please. Yeah. Continuing. In Washington, lawmakers, to see new data on a probe, have some more documents to review. We still have some unanswered questions in the Russia investigation, Paul Ryan said. Suicides are rising across the United States. Sadly, as GOP conservatives okay tentative dreamers deal in immigration. Clinton email probe expected to criticize Comey. And what's this about? Dinged in an internal Justice Department review of the agency's Clinton email probe. Said President Trump he can't wait. Report will be released June 14th. Today is the 10th. And the Justice Department's Inspector General is widely expected to criticize Comey and other senior leaders for their handling of the investigation into whether Hillary Clinton mishandled classified information as Secretary of State. Oh, what a load. Continuing with the news from the San Francisco Chronicle, and just sharing with you the headlines. And that's it. Not really seeing anything else here, so and Facebook seeks fix for bridge backups. Oh my, okay. Let us continue. Looks to be we have about 6:35 here at thevoiceofstockton.org. I am Richard Slezak, and this is Sunday Evening News, Islam Show, and checking yesterday's record. The Ports close to clinching first half title. That is, the California League North Division leaders are firing on all cylinders after a 38-22 start. League leading apparently. And in the news portion, we dig it out. Lincoln High band director is San Joaquin County's top teacher. Homelessness and welfare get a boost in a state budget deal. There's a summer art splash. Include Aztec dancing. And here in Stockton. And let us probe a little further. Doubts on all sides as summit looms between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. Should states create their own single-payer healthcare systems? They need a lot of cooperation and backup from the federal government. That's been looked into here in California. And so we look, in the flu season was one of the deadliest for U.S. children. Center for Disease Control Prevention reports 172 pediatric deaths since October. Surpasses 2012-2013 flu season. All right, we're going to get going here and take a look at today's paper. Steve Moore served 12 years as sheriff, seeking a fourth term, did not win, was defeated, as was reported here yesterday, in his bid for a fourth term as sheriff by Pat Withrow. Says, I've had a good run. This isn't the end of the world. I've had a good run. I'm happy with how things have been. It's just a matter of the voters decided to put a new man in the office, and that's their right. Right now, I'm looking at retirement, said Steve Moore, told the Stockton Record. Our president did some tweets and put the G7 into a disarray. And, oh, there's Jose Hernandez shows makeshift bed in his van. And Migrant Workers Project, a safe place to stay in Stockton, isn't easy for all of us. And early SJ voter turnout at 17%. County registrar expects figure to increase after 50,000 uncounted ballots are tallied up. I think it was quite, judging by the numbers, it was higher than that. We went over those last night, and some elections did total out. At 53,000, seems to me. That's around 20% of the population, the voting population. Okay. And let us continue to go on to the Sunday Night Islam show, although, hold on, let us get a more of a weather forecast here, and that's going to be tonight clear, Stockton at 56, tomorrow sunny, Stockton high 94, low of 59, Tuesday sunny, high of 96, a low of 60. Wednesday, sunny with a high of 96, a low of 58. And Thursday, sunny here in Stockton with a high of 93 and a low of 56. So, yeah, it's going to be sunny, folks. And precipitation season to date at 9.22. Last season to date, 21.78. Normal season to date is 14 inches. So we're 5 inches below normal as of season to date. Ooh. Use your water frugally for, oh my, it's going to be pricey. Sorry to report, but that's inevitable. Resources are limited. And with that, we're going to get going with the Sunday Night Islam show. And for that, we put up the audition. And Let me type in its billboard. For today, and put in Sunday Islam show, and here we go. We got 6:42 p.m. and let us get started. Alrighty, in 3, 2, 1. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Richard Slezak here. It is time for the Sunday Night Islam show, and we're coming to you on the kxvs.org and the voiceofstockton.org. And I'm going to raise up this the sensitivity of this microphone a bit. That seems to improve things. And we'd love for you to become a member, and let's make Stockton better together. Give us a call at 209-467-4455. Become a member here at the Voice of Stockton. We'd love for you to be a sponsor as well if you have a small business. Commerce member is $100 per quarter. And executive member $200 per quarter, and an enterprise member $500 per quarter, and this involves sponsoring announcements throughout the day and night here at the Voice of Stockton. We reach over 100,000 people per month in our area. And that is San Joaquin County. And we're going to be bringing a lot of local music to you. So come on in, join the shows, and as sponsors, and get this thing rolling and get more business to you. Our sponsors are currently Hotel Furniture Liquidators over at 1648 North Shaw Road. Nearest cross street is East Fremont. The Miracle Mile Bookstore, 2210 Pacific Avenue, and Doors Book Recyclery at 2310 Pacific Avenue, where you can sell books, buy books, and enlighten yourself and others. Custom Plastics and Signs, 326 East Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard. You can get plastic sheets, rods, and tubes, signage to order, stencils, vehicle and boat graphics, t-shirts printed, business cards printed, displays, yes, fabricated. At 326 East Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard, Custom Plastics and Signs. Millennium Computer Repair. Give Sarfraz Khan a call, 209-922-1879 for computer repairs, hardware, and software, parts replaced. Give them a call, Millennium Computer Repair, 209-922-1879. Habitat for Humanity Restore at 4933 West Lane. A wide assortment of building materials, paints, HVAC, electrical, plumbing apparatus, as well as doors and windows. New stuff arriving daily, gently used. Tender donuts we bake fresh daily. Chandrith Sand, Siv's Case Sam at 1304 East Hammer Lane. Leaders T-shirt printing and business cards at 500 East Lodi Avenue at Garfield in Lodi. All righty. Heading on into it. We're going to be doing some history, because what Muhammad went through was complicated. And let me bring up 642 start audition. members, sponsors, and let's just bring these microphones right on up here so none of these precious words get wasted. And it's time for a history lesson. We just finished Surah 2. It's kind of University of the Air radio. We're 2/3 of the way through the Bukhari, Hadith, and Sunnah, and halfway through the Quran in terms of volumes of number of pages read, if anything. And that is, we've done the Meccan, we've done Surah 2, which is the first Medinan, and the rest of them are rather lengthy, and the traditions will be being shared here, governing kind of stuff. So new stuff coming, and to put some flesh on it, a place, a time in history, we're going to be sharing with you from The Age of Faith. This is by Will Durant. He wrote this back in the 40s and 50s, and he was a history professor, quite a good one. This is part of a 12-volume set, and they're all this big. Took him like 25 years. And also Karen Armstrong, who's theologian, historian, her biography on Mohammed, she titles it A Prophet for Our Time. So we're going to be covering the years 619 to 624. Last week we kind of went back, and even though we are now into the Medinan era, to bring you what history, what's been going on, and what caused him to come forth with the late Meccan surahs, and what he was facing while he was doing his preaching. And let me take a little kind of a break here. I got some fluids. Don't worry, it's not a blue ribbon. Not that kind of operation. Harry Carey was many decades announcer for the Chicago Cubs, and he enjoyed beers during the games. But he was Harry Carey, and you don't get more Mr. Cub than Ernie Banks. That was Mr. Cub. Oh, yeah. Okay. Oh, my. Yeah, that's 624 to 628. I apologize for that, because we covered a few things here in the newspapers and didn't get to hear them out. And now in the year 612, what happened was 619 brought triple misfortune to Muhammad. Khadijah, his most loyal supporter, and Abu Talib, his protector, died. He was insecure, he felt, in Mecca. He was discouraged by the slow increase of his followers there. He moved to Taif. It's 60 miles east of Mecca. In Taif, he was rejected. Leaders did not care to offend the merchant aristocracy of Mecca. Also horrified by any religious innovation, booted him through the streets, pelted him with stones until blood flowed from his legs. And we're going to do a little time check here. And it looks to be 6:52. And we're doing the Age of Faith, page 165, 166. And he went back to Mecca. He married the widow Sauda and betrothed himself at age 50 to Aisha, the pretty and petulant 7-year-old daughter of Abu Bakr. His visions continued. He had the night vision of going to Jerusalem and then going up to the seventh heaven. We've read that here. It's been well covered. But he woke up safe in his bed in Mecca. The legend of this flight, he didn't fly, he was dreaming this, made Jerusalem a third holy city for Islam. In the year 620, Muhammad preached to merchants who came from Medina on pilgrimage to the Kaaba. They heard him with some acceptance, for the doctrine of monotheism, a divine messenger, and the last judgment were familiar to them from the creed of the Medina Jews. Returning to their city, some of them expounded the new gospel to their friends, several Jews, seeing little difference between Muhammad's teachings and their own, gave it a tentative welcome. In 622, some 73 citizens of Medina came privately to Muhammad and invited him to make Medina his home. He asked would they protect him as faithfully as their own families. They vowed they would, but ask what reward they would receive should they be killed in the process. And he answered, paradise. Abu Sufyan, grandson of Umayyah, became head of the Meccan Quraysh. This is 621, 622. Having been brought up in an order of hatred for all descendants of Hashim, of which Muhammad was one. He renewed the persecution of Muhammad's followers. He had heard that the Prophet was meditating a flight and feared Muhammad, once established in Medina, might stir it to war against Mecca and the Kaaba cult. The Quraysh commissioned some of their number to apprehend Muhammad, perhaps to kill him. Muhammad fled with Abu Bakr to the cave of Thor, once appraised of the plot. And that was a league distance. And I think a league, I'm not sure what a league is. I think it's about 3 miles or so. The Quraysh emissaries sought them for 3 days, but failed to find them. Children of Abu Bakr brought camels, and the 2 men rode northward through the night, and through many days for some 200 miles until September 24th, 622. That's 924, 622. Muhammad arrived in Medina. "200 Meccan adherents had preceded them in the guise of departing pilgrims and stood at the city's gates with Medina converts to welcome the Muhammad. 17 years later, the Caliph Omar designated the first day, July 16th, 622, of the Arabian year in which this hijra, or flight, took place as the official beginning of the Islamic era. I'm paraphrasing what's written here. And so let's do a little time check and see what we got going on here. I like to check my computers. The screens do go dark, and good. We're at 6:58 p.m. here at the Voice of Stockton, and things seem to be streaming on YouTube and Facebook just fine. And it's history time. University of the Air Radio on Mohammed's activities. And Yathrib was going to be renamed Medinat al-Nabi, city of the Prophet. Yathrib was situated on the western edge of the Central Arabian Plateau. Had a nice climate. Has a nice climate. There's hundreds of gardens, palm groves, and farms. Muhammad rode into town. One group after another called to him, "Alight here, O Prophet, abide with us." Arab persistent, some caught the halter of his camel to detain him. He answered with perfect diplomacy, "The choice lies with the camel. Let him advance freely." It hallowed his new residence as chosen by God. And when the camels stopped, Muhammad built a mosque and two adjoining houses, one for Sauda, one for Asia. Later he added new apartments as he took new wives. Leaving Mecca, he had snapped many kinship ties. Now he tried to replace bonds of blood with those of religious brotherhood in a theocratic state. The refugees, Muhajirin, from Mecca, and the helpers, Ansar, or converts in Medina, coupled each member of one group with a member of the other, an adoptive brotherhood, called both groups to worship in sacred union in the mosque. In the first ceremony held there, he mounted the pulpit and cried out, "Allah is most great." The assembly burst forth in the same proclamation. He backed down into the congregation. He bowed in prayer. At the foot of the pulpit, he prostrated himself 3 times while continuing to pray. Prostrations were symbolized that submission of the soul to Allah, which gave on the new faith the name Islam, to surrender, to make peace, and to its adherents the kindred name Muslimin, or Muslims, the surrendering ones, those who have made their peace with God, turning then to the assembly. He bade it to observe this ritual to the end of time and to this day. Its prayer Muslims follow. The sermon completed the ceremony after announcing, in Muhammad's case, a new revelation and directing actions and policies of the week. Muhammad was creating a civic rule for Medina, and more he was compelled to address his time and inspirations to the practical problems of social organization, daily morals, even to, oh my, we have 7:02 p.m. You are webtuned to thevoiceofstockton.org and kxvs.org. This is the Sunday Night Islam Show, coming to you also over Facebook and YouTube, live webcasting, and all cameras look to be on the host. I'm Richard Slezak, having a good time, sharing with you the life of Mohammed here on the Islam Show, for we bring forth the Quran and traditions of Islam, and they come from a human being, Mohammed. So we got to know about him, what was going on, and his followers. It's similar to what we have going on today. You have Trump and you have his followers. Know both. So their daily morals, even to intertribal diplomacy and war. As in Judaism, no distinction was made between secular and religious affairs. All alike came under religious jurisdiction. He is both Caesar and Christ, but not all in Medina accepted as authority. The majority of Arabs stood outside as the disaffected, viewed the new creed and its ritual skeptically, and wondered whether Muhammad was destroying their traditions and liberties and involving them in war. The Medina Jews clung to their own faith, continued to trade with Meccan Quraysh. Muhammad drew up with these Jews a subtle concordat. Here we go. The Jews who attach themselves to our commonwealth shall be protected from all insults and vexations. They shall have an equal right with our own people to our assistance and good offices. They shall form with the Muslims one composite nation. They shall practice their religion as freely as the Muslims. They shall join the Muslims in defending Yathrib against all enemies. All future disputes between those who accept this charter shall be referred under God to the Prophet. And we're on page 168, and we have 7:05 p.m. here at the Voice of Stockton. And the agreement was soon accepted by all Jewish tribes of Medina and the surrounding country, that is the Banu Nadir, the Banu Qurayza, and the Banu Kanuka. Immigration of 200 Meccan families, these were converts to Islam. Created a food storage in Medina. A policy of taking food where it could be had was done. Muhammad commissioned his lieutenants to raid the caravans that passed Medina. He was adopting the morals of most Arab tribes in his time. When the raid succeeded, 4/5 of the spoils went to the raiders, 1/5 to the Prophet for religious and charitable uses. The share of the slain raider went to his widow, and he himself at once entered paradise. The merchants of Mecca, whose economic life depended on the security of the caravans, plotted revenge. One raid scandalized Medina as well as Mecca. A man died. It was the last day of Rajab, one of the sacred months when Arab morality laid a moratorium on violence. In 623, Muhammad himself organized a band of 300 armed men
to waylay a rich caravan coming from Syria to Mecca. Abu Sufyan, who commanded the caravan, got wind of the plan, changed its route, and sent to Mecca for help. 900 Quraysh came. The miniature armies met near the Wadi Badr, 20 miles south of Medina. If Muhammad had been defeated, his career might have been ended there and then. Muhammad led his men to victory, ascribed it to Allah as a miracle of confirming his leadership, and returned to Medina with rich booty and many prisoners. Very interesting time. January 624. Badr battle. Now, they did come back with prisoners. Those who had been especially active in the persecution at Mecca were put to death. The rest were freed for lucrative ransoms. Abu Sufyan survived and promised revenge. Strengthened by victory, Muhammad used the customary morality of war. Asma, a Medine's poetress, having attacked him in her rhymes, Omir, a blind Muslim, made his way into his room and plunged his sword so forcefully into the sleeping woman's breast that it affixed her to the couch. In the mosque the next morning, Muhammad asked Omir, "Hast thou slain Asma?" "Yes," answered Omir. "Is there cause for apprehension?" "None," said Muhammad. "A couple of goats will hardly knock their heads together for it." Afak, a centenarian convert to Judaism, composed a satire on the Prophet and was slain as he slept in his courtyard. A third Medine's poet, Ka'b ibn al-Ashraf, son of a Jewish, abandoned Islam when Muhammad turned against the Jews. He wrote verses prodding the Quraysh to avenge their defeat, and enraged Muslims by addressing love sonnets to their wives in premature troubadour style. "Who will ease me of this man?" asked Muhammad. The poet's severed head was laid at the Prophet's feet that evening. Muslim view these executions were a legitimate defense against treason. Muhammad was the head of state and had full authority to condemn. So that was to page 169, and we go on. Got 710 here at the Voice of Stockton, and we're going to shift out over now to that same time period, but a different viewpoint. And this is from, again, Muhammad, a prophet for our time. Oh, you know what I failed to do? I failed to put on these lights. There we go. Okay, that makes it a little bit easier to see in here. And let me get these screens up to where I can see them. And alrighty, we got 7-Eleven, and would help if I use the right mouse. Okay. Alrighty. Yep. 7:11 here, 7:12 here at the Voice of Stockton. And looks like the sound has been recorded well through the show, looking at the audition screen. And during the Hajj of 620, he visited pilgrims who were camping in the valley of Mina, going from tent to tent in the hope of attracting support and protection. Now, the years preceding, 618, 619, he had been reaching out to the Bedouins, but they didn't like it. They rejected his submissive religion, that one they saw as submissive. Arabs from Yathrib camped in the gully of Aqaba. Muhammad explained his mission and recited the Quran to them. They were attentive and excited. They turned to one another and said this must be the prophet expected by their Jewish and Hanifi neighbors. Muhammad might be just the person to solve the seemingly inseparable problems of Yathrib. Yathrib, a series of hamlets, each occupied by a different tribal group, and each heavily fortified. Situated in an oasis, a fertile island about 20 square miles, surrounded by volcanic rocks and uncultivatable stony ground. Some of its inhabitants engaged in trade, most were farmers. Big crops were dates, palm orchards, arable fields. They were not wholly dependent upon commerce, retained more of the old Badawa values, including entrenched hostility to other tribal groups. The oasis was engulfed in an escalating series of apparently unstoppable wars. Originally cultivated by pioneering Jewish settlers, there were about 20 Jewish tribes in Yathrib, many of whose members may have been Arabs who assimilated Judaism. They preserved a separate religious identity. Most were almost indistinguishable from their pagan neighbors. Clan and tribal loyalty came first. There was no united Jewish community. Each Jewish tribe formed separate allegiances with Arab groups, and were often at war with one another. Their date crop had made them rich, but they were also skilled jewelers, manufacturers, weapons, and craftsmen. 5 largest Jewish clans: the Thalaba, Huddle, Kireza, Nadir, and Quainuka, the last of which controlled the only market in Yathrib, had achieved an almost complete monopoly of the economy that they had pioneered. The Bani Kala, during the 6th century, that is the 500s, had emigrated from South Arabia and settled in the oasis. They formed 2 distinct clans, the Aus and the Khazraj, that became 2 separate tribes. The Arabs did acquire their own land, build their own fortresses, and by the early 600s were in a slightly stronger position than the Jews. The Jews and the pagans were able to coexist. Jews often employed Arabs to transport their dates, while the Arabs respected the skills and heritage of the Jews, seeing them as a people of high lineage and properties, whereas we were but an Arab tribe who did not possess any palm trees nor vineyards, being people of only sheep and camels. By 620, The Oz and the Khazraj were engaged in bloody conflict with one another. Jewish clans had become involved in their struggle. Nadir and Koreza supporting the Oz, and the Kanuka was allied with the Khazraj. 617, there was a stalemate. Neither side could gain ascendancy. Abdullah ibn Ubay, chief of the Khazraj, had still aloof from the fighting, acquired a reputation for impartiality. The Arabs were averse to a monarchy. This type of experiment never worked in the peninsula. Oz were naturally reluctant to hand leadership to a member of the Khazraj. Other chiefs of the Khazraj were equally unwilling to relinquish their power to Ibn Ubay. Pilgrims immediately realized that Muhammad would be far more effective arbiter, that is, a hakam, than Ibn Ubay. They had no problem with his religious message. Arabs of Yathrib had been drifting towards monotheism for some time. The Oz and the Khazraj had no scripture of their own. The pilgrims were thrilled to hear that God had finally sent a prophet to the Arabs. They made their formal surrender to God on the spot. So let us go to them and invite them to this religion of yours. If God unites them, then no man will be mightier than you. They had little influence in the oasis, needed to consult their chiefs and wise men. They reported back to Muhammad a year later. Muhammad looked beyond Mecca and even to entertain an extraordinary idea of abandoning his tribe to take up permanent residence with another. He married Sada, the cousin and sister-in-law of Subael, the devout pagan chief of a Quraysh clan of Amr. She had been married to one of the Muslims who had migrated to Abyssinia in 616, but was now a widow, and it was a good Muhammad was a good match for her. Abu Bakr was also anxious to forge a closer link to the Prophet, and proposed that he should marry his daughter Aisha, who was then 6 years old. Aisha was betrothed to Muhammad in a ceremony in which she wasn't present. In later years, she recalled that the first inkling she had a new status was when her mother explained to her she could no longer play in the streets, but must invite her friends into the family home. Muhammad enjoyed with Khadijah, it would have been commonplace, the monogamous marriage. But polygamy was a bit more common. Marriages were not romantic or sexual love affairs, but were undertaken largely for practical ends. Sada seems to have been a rather homely woman who was past her first youth, but she could take care of Muhammad's domestic needs. Muhammad may also have hoped to win over Suhail, who was still undecided about the revelation. There was no impropriety in Muhammad's betrothal to Asia. Marriages conducted in absentia to seal an alliance were often contracted at this time between adults and minors who were even younger than Aisha. Practice continued into Europe well into the early modern era. Aisha, they consummated the marriage when the young lady reached puberty. Muhammad's marriages usually had a political aim. He was starting to establish an entirely different kind of clan, based on ideology rather than kinship. Blood tie was still a sacred value and helped to cement his experimental community. Time check looks to be about 7:16 p.m. and continuing. And in the Hajj of 621, 6 converts from Yathrib duly returned to Mecca, bringing 7 others with them. Again they met Muhammad in the gully of Aqaba. They took the pledge of Aqaba, promised to worship Allah alone, to refrain from stealing, lying, and fanticide, pledged to obey Muhammad's directives concerning social justice. In return, Muhammad promised them paradise. On the first pact, the emphasis on religion and ethics. There was yet no political commitment. They took with them Musab ibn Umyar, a trusted Muslim, to instruct the people of Yathrib in the new faith when they returned. That was 621. Tribal hatred was intense in the oasis. Aus nor Khazraj could bear to hear a rival leading the prayers or reciting the Quran, so it was important that these offices were performed by a neutral outsider. First, the Aus were antagonistic to the faith, but gradually the power of the Quran broke down their reserves. Sayyid ibn Muad, chief of one of the leading Aus clans, was horrified to hear Musab was preaching in his territory, so he dispatched his second-in-command to drive him away, who bore home on the little group, brandishing his lance. Asked the Muslim how he had the temerity to spread these lies among weak, foolish people. The Jahili rage did not come forth. Musab quietly asked him to sit down and judge for himself. The deputy agreed, stuck his lance in the ground, listened to the recitation. He was very impressed. He had proclaimed his faith to Allah and prostrated himself in prayer. He went back to report to his chief. Saud was furious, grasped his own lance, and marched off to confront Musab himself, only to be overwhelmed in his turn by the Quran. He then summoned his people and asked them to follow him, trusting his leadership implicitly. The entire clan converted en masse. The news of Saud's dramatic about-face made a great impression on other chiefs, who began to take Musab more seriously. There were Muslims in almost every family in the oasis before long. Muhammad's preaching mission had stalled largely because the Quraysh could not believe that such an ordinary person could become a messenger of Allah. Conditions in Yathrib were different. Muhammad was not a commonplace fellow. He was a remote, mysterious figure whose coming was eagerly anticipated. Muhammad's teaching threatened to damage the cult of the Haram in Mecca. That was crucial to the economy, but there was no sanctuary full of idols in Yathrib. Not everybody was enamored by the new faith. Ibn Ubay naturally feared that his position was being undermined. Others were still committed either to the old paganism or to Hanafiya, but at this stage the opposition was muted. There might be some material advantage to be gained from him if he could solve the problems of Yathrib. Jewish tribes were also prepared to give Muhammad the benefit of the doubt. Muhammad introduced new practices. Because of the night journey, Muslims now prayed facing Jerusalem. Ah, that's a key bit of history. And what time are we getting to have? Looks like 7:27 p.m. And we're on page 95. Page 95 of and that is from Night Journey Surah to Surah to Jerusalem was Qibla. He also instructed Mossab to hold a special prayer meeting on Friday afternoon while the Jews were preparing for their Sabbath, and to fast with the Jews on Yom Kippur. Muslims would now pray in the middle of the day as the Jews did and observe a modified version of the Jewish dietary laws similar to those adopted by the early Christians. Scholars used to think that Muhammad introduced these new devotions in order to appeal to the Jews of Yathrib. Muhammad would not have expected the Jews to convert to his religion because they had their own revealed din. That's what term is used here. God decreed that each community should have its own messenger, but it was natural for Muslims to pray and fast in the same way as the other members of the Abrahamic family. 622, a large party of pilgrims left Yathrib for the Hajj. Some were pagans. 73 of the men and 2 of the women were Muslims. Muhammad went out to greet them at Aqaba. This time the meeting took place in the dead of night. There was a sense of menace and of bridges being irrevocably burned. The Quran speaks of scheming of the Quraysh. Muhammad had reason to believe that the Kafirun were plotting to expel him and bar Muslims from the Haram. Muhammad was now taking practical steps to leave his tribe. Ibn Ishaq claims this was a positive decision on his part. The Quran repeatedly claims that the Muslims were expelled or driven out of Mecca. The meeting was conducted in deadly secrecy. Muslims from Yathrib did not even mention it to the pagans in their party in case they gossiped and alerted the Quraysh to what was afoot. Muhammad was asking the Muslims of Mecca to make a hijrah, that is, migration to Yathrib. The Muslims were about to abandon their kinfolk and accept the permanent protection of strangers. In Arabia, where the tribe was the most sacred value of all, this amounted to blasphemy. It was far more shocking than the Quranic rejection of the goddesses. There was always a system of confederation whereby an individual or an entire group could become honorary members of another tribe, but these were usually temporary arrangements and had never entailed alienation from one's own people. The very word hijrah suggests a painful severance. The root HJR had been translated, he cut himself off from friendly or loving communication or intercourse. He ceased to associate with them. Henceforth, the Muslims made hijrah to Yathrib could be called the muhajirah, the immigrants. This traumatic dislocation was central to their new identity. The foreigner was Zalim, an outsider. connoted base, ignoble, evil. Poets described the Zalim as a useless, superfluous accretion. Tribal loyalty was experienced as burning love of kinfolk and harsh contempt for the alien in Arabia. Anybody who put a despised Zalim before his own people invited passionate scorn and revulsion. The Aus and the Khazraj were about to swear allegiance to the Qurayshi. Muhammad had promised to give protection and help, Nasr, to a large group of outsiders who would inevitably put strain on the limited resources of the oasis. Henceforth the Muslims of Yathrib would be known as Ansar, commonly known as the Helpers. Nasr meant that you had to be ready to back up your aid with force. When they met Muhammad that night in Aqaba, the Helpers had decided to make a second pact with Muhammad, which would be known as the Pledge of War. When the time came, the Ansar left their pagan companions sleeping in their tents and stole softly like sand grouse to Aqaba, where they met Muhammad and his uncle Abbas, who acted as his spokesman. Abbas had not converted to Islam, and he must have been shocked by Muhammad's decision to leave Mecca. He wanted to make sure he would be safe in Yathrib. Muhammad, he said, was protected by the Hashim in Mecca, but was ready to forgo this security in order to join the Ansar. If they had the smallest doubt about his safety, they should give up the entire project immediately. The Ansar stood firm. Bara ibn Ma'ur, chief of the Khazraj, took Muhammad by the hand and swore that the Aus and the Khazraj would both extend to Muhammad exactly the same protection as they gave their own women and children. Another helper interrupted while the Ma'ur was speaking. What if Muhammad went back to Mecca and abandoned Yathrib to the wrath of the Qurayshi? Muhammad smiled and replied, I am of you, and you are of me. I will war against them that war against you, and be at peace with those at peace with you. So the Ansar made this solemn oath. We pledge ourselves to war in complete obedience to the apostle in weal or woe, in ease and hardship and evil circumstances, that we would not wrong anyone, that we would speak the truth at all times, and that in God's service we would fear the censure of none. Pact was crouched in tribal terminology, concentrated on mutual defense. There was not a thought of a united Ummah. Aus, Khazraj, and Quraysh would still operate separately. Muhammad would not go to Yathrib as head of state, but simply as the arbitrator, Hakam, of disputes between Aus and Khazraj, and as the chief of the immigrants from Mecca. The Ansar would be ruled by 12 overseers from the various clans. Even though Islam had made great strides in Yathrib after a single year, the Muslim community there was almost as large as the beleaguered Ummah in Mecca. The fact remained that even after the Hijrah, the Muslims would remain a tiny minority in the oasis, dwarfed by the size of the aloof, appraising pagans, Hanifs, and Jews. The Pledge of War marked a major expansion of Islam. The new religion had spread to other tribal groups. It had not yet transcended the tribal ethos. Hijrah was a risky enterprise, an irrevocable, frightening step. Nobody knew how it would work out because nothing quite like it had ever happened in Arabia before. After the Hajj, the Ansar returned to Yathrib to await arrival of the Muslim fugitives. The Quran now adopted the Aramaic name that the Jews gave to the settlement of Yathrib, that is, Medinta, the city. Yathrib was about to become Al-Madinat, the city of the Prophet. In Mecca, Muhammad began to persuade Muslims to make the hijrah. He did not command it. All right. Let us take a short pause here. We're at page 100. And I'm going to do a time check, and beep. Okay, we got 7:37 here at the Voice of Stockton, and checking the audition. Okay, audition doing fine, and checking the, oh yeah, everything's working good. Okay, back out. And into the home stretch. And the Muslims were careful not to draw attention to their flight and usually agreed to meet up outside the city limits and to travel in small, unobtrusive groups. Umar left with his family. Uthman ibn Affan and Rakayah made the journey with Zayd and Hamza, but Muhammad and Abu Bakr stayed behind until nearly everybody had left. But it was not long before the major defection left disturbing gaps in the city, revealing the open wound that Muhammad had inflicted on his tribe. The big houses in the middle of Mecca looked desolate and portentous to passerbys, doors blowing to and fro, empty of inhabitants. In August 622, Mutim, Muhammad's Meccan protector, died. Muhammad's position in Mecca was now untenable. There was a special meeting to discuss his fate in the assembly, for which Abu Lahab pointedly absented himself. Some of the elders simply wanted to throw Muhammad out of Mecca, but they were overruled by those who felt to allow him to join those unprincipled renegades in Yathrib would be dangerous. Abu Jahl came up with a plan. Each clan would select a strong, well-protected young man. Collectively, they would represent the entire tribe and would kill Muhammad together. There would be no vendetta because the Hashim could not take on the whole of the Quraysh. That night, a band of carefully chosen youths gathered outside Muhammad's house, but were disturbed to hear the voices of Sada and some of Muhammad's daughters through the window. It'd be shameful to kill a man in the presence of his women, so they decided to wait until he left the house the following morning. One of them peered in and saw a figure lying in bed wrapped in Muhammad's cloak. Unbeknownst to him, Muhammad had already escaped through a back window, leaving Ali lying apparently asleep wearing his clothes. When Ali strode outside the next morning, the young men realized they had been tricked, and the Quraysh offered a reward of 100 camel mares to anybody who would bring Muhammad back dead or alive. And I'm going to close out this page. And by that time, Muhammad and Abu Bakr were hiding in the mountain cave just outside the city. They stayed there for 3 days. A search party actually passed the cave but did not bother to look inside because an enormous spider's web covered the entrance, and a rock dove who had been sitting on her eggs for some time had her nest in an acacia tree in exactly the place where a man would have to put his foot when climbing into the cave. All the while, Mohammed experienced a deep calm and strong sense of God's presence. God is with us. Thereupon God bestowed upon him from one high his gift of inner peace. Increasingly, the Quran would insist that when Muslims found themselves in frightening or disturbing circumstances, they should be serene and tranquil and should never fall prey to the impetuous rage and vengeful fury of Jahiliyyah. All right, going to hold it there, page 102. Paragraph 1, stop. Okay. That's a history lesson. Muhammad escapes to Medina. And so we will continue this, the Islam show, next week, and probably get into some traditions sharing. And thank you for being with us. This has been the Sunday Evening Islam Show with your host, Richard Slezak, coming to you over the voiceofstockton.org, kxvs.org, also on Facebook and YouTube, and 321. All righty, we're still webcasting from the Voice of Stockton, and let me just take down the Facebook and YouTube. Heck, let me turn the camera this way, bam, and gonna take it on down, folks. Thanks for watching on Facebook and YouTube, and if you're seeing this on a replay, thanks for watching and listening. Hope you learned a few things I did. All righty. And